Hey everyone, in this tutorial we're going to take a look at using SQLite in a NativeScript Android and iOS application. So if you've been following the content that I've been producing, you'll know that previously I showed how to use application settings, which is a key value store for persisting data in a NativeScript application. This time we're going to use SQLite. So like always, we're gonna start by generating a brand new project. And then we're going to go through the steps of building it up and seeing it in action. For this tutorial, because it's more consistent on what everyone is able to use, we're gonna demo it in Android because maybe not everyone will be using a Mac, because you will need a Mac if you wish to do this for iOS. So let's go ahead and first I'll go ahead and open up my terminal and I'll zoom in, so don't worry. But we're going to go ahead and create a new project on our desktop. So with our desktop as our current working directory for the terminal, or command prompt if you're using Windows, let's go ahead and run the following commands. So we're going to say tns create SQL project. With the project created, let's go ahead and navigate into it using our terminal. So navigate into SQL project, and then go ahead and say tns platform add Android. Now again, if you're using a Mac, you can go ahead and add the iOS platform as well, but for simplicity, we're just going to stick with Android here. All right, with the project created, let's go ahead and clear our terminal. So we have our project created, we have our platform added. Now what we need to do is we need to add the SQLite NativeScript plugin. So if you wanted to, in theory, because this is NativeScript, you can go ahead and interface with Android code directly in your JavaScript. But for convenience, we're going to use a plugin to take care of this for us. So let's go ahead and say tns plugin add NativeScript hyphen SQLite. Perfect. The plugin is now installed. So I'm going to go ahead and switch windows here. I'm going to drag the SQL project into another portion of my screen here, and I'm going to open it. So this is the project that was created on our desktop. What we're going to do is we're going to focus inside of the app directory of our project. So we can go ahead and start by saying, let's go ahead and open up the project. It's going to open up everything on my screen because I'm using Atom by GitHub. But we're gonna see what we're gonna focus on here. So inside of the app directory, I do have all of my files presented to me. We're gonna be focusing on the main page JS, main page XML, and then we're finally gonna be focusing on main view model. So these are the three files that we're gonna focus on here. So a little bit of a description on the three. So main page JS is gonna act as our controller here. This is our model. The main view model is going to be our view model because NativeScript operates on an MVVM. So our view model is going to be all of our data-driven stuff for a particular screen. So that particular screen is going to be the main page XML file. So we're going to go ahead and start with the main view model. So we're going to go ahead and define what we expect to use within this particular screen. We're not going to worry about how the controller logic is or our UI looks at the moment. We're just going to worry about what we're expecting from a data standpoint. So let's go ahead and start by adding the following. So right underneath the observable, because we are still going to be using observables here, we're going to say var SQLite equals require NativeScript SQLite. So we're now adding the dependency of SQLite into this particular JavaScript file. So let's go ahead and save it. We aren't going to be using this get message function, so you can remove it. We're also going to be removing quite a bit of other stuff. So starting with, let's go ahead and remove everything except for the creation of our observable and our view model. So because we are going to be returning a view model. So now let's go ahead and say view model dot first name equals which is an empty string. So we're actually going to be using two fields in our SQLite database. Again, this is a very simple application. The first field is going to be a first name. The next one is going to be, of course, a last name. So these are our two properties. What we're going to add next is we're going to add two different functions that are going to be accessible from our UI. So we're going to have an insert function as well as a select function. From a UI perspective, we're not going to be doing anything complex. We're not going to be displaying this information on the screen. It's going to be all displayed from our console, but you can easily take this to the next level and display it in the UI. So what we're going to do is we're going to say view model dot create dot insert. So this is going to be our insert function. And we're not going to define anything complex here. We're just going to say we're going to execute a SQL query. So we're going to say database.xSQL, because this is the function to execute insert, an update, and delete kind of statements. Select statements have their own call. So this is going to be for write only, not read. So let's go ahead and create this query. So let's say insert into, let's say our table is going to be called people. We've not yet created it, but it will exist. And then we're going to say we're going to insert a first name and a last name, the two fields that we declared up top. And then we're going to say values, question mark, question mark. So we're using question marks because we're using a parameterized query in order to prevent SQL injection. Less common in a mobile application, but being that this is SQL, we want to make every best effort to prevent any kind of injection attack. So now, after we've defined our query here, it's a very simple query. We're gonna pass in the parameters, what these question marks are. So we're gonna say this dot first name, this dot last name. So you can keep adding more depending on how many question marks there are, but we only have two. The next part of this is we're going to close this and we're going to say then, because we're going to use the promise part of the SQLite plugin. You could also use callbacks if you want, but we're going to stick with promises. I'm going to say ID equals, and then the greater than symbol, curly bracket. Close that off. So this is in the event of a successful insert. So we're going to say console.log insert result, and our result is going to be the ID. So when it's successful, it's going to return the particular ID of this row. So whatever this primary key value is. All right, so that was the success. Now let's figure out what happens if there's an error. So we're going to say error. We're going to say console.log. I'm going to say insert error. And we're just going to say error just like that. Our insert statement is now done. So now we can worry about the select statement. So let's say view model dot select equals function. Now we're going to use a different command here. We're going to use database dot all, and our query is going to be select. We're going to use the asterisk, the star, from, and then from the people table as well. This is going to be just a select all query, so we're not going to add any parameters, but we're going to say then, and it's going to return our rows, and we're going to be able to decide what we want to do with those rows. So what we want to do is we want to loop through them and print them to our console. So we're going to say for var row in rows console.log result rows row, and close that off. So it's going to print out every row that's returned from this database statement. And in the event of an error, we're going to say error console.log select error, and then error. So that's in the event maybe the select statement failed for some reason. All right, so one thing that you've probably noticed by now is we're making use of this database object right here, this database class here, but we've never really defined it anywhere. So what we want to do is we want to define it inside of our create view model. So this is something that's going to be passed in from our controller. So let's go ahead and save it. At this point, our view model should be done. So we can now take our adventure over to the the main page, which is our actual model, or as I like to think of it, as a controller. So I've got this opened up. We're going to make some adjustments here. For one, what we're going to do is we're going to add the SQL library again. So we're going to say var SQLite equals require native script SQLite. Up here, we're going to leave this statement because we are going to use the view model that we created just a second ago. We're going to leave our onNavigating_to function, but we're going to change it up a little bit. So remember, we don't have a table at this point in time. We have all of our logic in place to select and insert, but we don't have a table to work with. So what we want to do is when this particular page loads, we want to create a table if it does not already exist. So what we can do is we can say something like this. We can say new SQLite. Let's go ahead and call our database MyDB. You can call it whatever you want. Doesn't really matter. So we're gonna close this off. We're gonna say then, and it's gonna return a database if it was successful. So we're gonna say this is our success, and in the event of an error, let's go ahead and say error, and we can print something to the logs here. Console.log create. No, we're not creating. Let's just say, well, we technically are creating, but let's just say open DB error. So I mean, this command with the MyDB, if it doesn't exist, it will create it. Otherwise, it'll just open it. All right, so now we can worry about executing something based on this database that we just opened. So now we can say something like this: db.execute SQL, and we're going to create our table now. So we're going to say create table if not exists. So we're going to create it if it doesn't exist. Otherwise, we're going to ignore it. But it'll still be a successful statement even if it already exists. So we're going to create a table called people. We're going to say ID integer primary key auto increment. We're going to say first name text. We're going to say last name text, and then we can worry about what happens if it was successful. So we're going to say then ID, whoops, wrong symbol. So this is the event that it was successful. We're also going to handle the scenario where there was an error, so let's do that right now. Error equals, we're just going to say console.log create table error. Perfect. So now what happens if it was successful? Well, we want to say page.binding_context equals create view model. But remember, we're going to pass in that database that we've just now opened. So we want to, what we're doing here is we're kind of creating a singleton in a sense, a singleton for this particular page. We're going to keep the database open for as long as this page remains active. With that said, this line right here on line 15, we're going to remove it because at this point, we're only going to access our view model if all of this other stuff was successful. So let's go ahead and remove line 15. Click save. I notice I missed some semicolons here. It probably won't cause any kind of error, but I want to be consistent, so we have semicolons. All right, so our controller or our model is now complete. So now let's worry about the final part, being our UI. So open up main page XML. We're going to make some changes here. So we're going to keep our page. We're going to keep our stack layout. The page is going to call this navigating to function as soon as as soon as it loads on navigating to. But we are going to change a few things on the screen here. So we're going to do the following. Oops. I think it's probably best if I just erase everything here. All right. So in our stack layout, which is going to be vertically aligned, we're going to say text field ID equals first name. Let's give it a hint. Let's say first name. And we're going to bind our text from our view model. So we're going to bind first name. So remember, in our view model, we created a field called first name. This is where it's being used. I'm going to create another text field ID equals, and of course this is going to be our last name. Hint equals last name. And then the text, again, is going to be from our previous view model. It's going to be last name. Oops, get some craziness with some brackets here. Perfect. All right, finally, we're going to create another stack layout for our buttons. So we're going to say stack layout. This time around, though, that the orientation is not going to be vertical, it's going to be horizontal. So we're going to say orientation equals horizontal. And we're going to add two buttons here. So we're going to say button text equals insert. And the tap event, so when somebody taps on this button, it's going to call the insert function of our view model. Oops. I'm going to just go ahead and duplicate this line here. Instead of an insert, the second button is going to be a select. And at this point, we're done. So we're now going to see what this application is, what it's all about. So let me open up my terminal again. Let me open my simulator here. I'll move this so that way they're closer. So we're going to say TNS build Android. And this command could take a little while. The first time is always the longest. All right, so it just finished building. So now at this point, we can go ahead and test it out. So let's go say TNS run Android. And I'm using Genymotion as my simulator, so it should go ahead and run it directly on my simulator here. I actually could have used TNS run the first time. So what it's doing is it's actually rebuilding it a second time. Didn't have to do that. So my application, it now loaded. So let's go ahead and check it out. So it should present stuff in the logs here. So let's go ahead and say add. So we're going to add Nick Raboy, and I'm going to click insert. So insert result 1. So the ID that was returned from that successful insert was 1. Let's go ahead and add another one. I'm going to say Maria Raboy, and I'm going to insert her. So the insert result was 2. So let's go ahead and see what happens when I now try to select this data. So I selected it, and as you can see, both of the entries that I added have been saved, and they were returned just now. So this is a perfect example of using SQLite within our native script project. It is personally more convenient than working with the application settings, which is a key value because you can't necessarily run queries with application settings. And this is better for larger data sets as well. It's not the only way to save your data. There's plenty of other ways. But this is a SQLite way, which is actually very native and usually the choice when it comes to Android. Not so much iOS. iOS uses core data as well, but it's definitely an option for iOS, a valid option.